Well, this is a weird one. Kemba Walker's been traded. It's worth noting there were conference semifinals playoff games last night and then now tonight as well. I don't even know if this trade can actually happen because it's still the middle of the year, but we'll get to that. Kemba Walker's been traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Al Horford is returning to Boston. We'll go through the entire trade, talk about what exactly is going down. Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so here are the terms of the trade. The Celtics are trading Kemba Walker, the 16th pick in the 21 draft, a 25 second-round pick to OKC for Al Horford, Moses Brown, a 23 pick, second-round pick. So we've talked about Kemba in two videos within the last week and a half. Became clear that Boston was going to look to move on from Kemba Walker for a variety of reasons. One, even though he's a great teammate, he doesn't really want to be in Boston anymore. He wants to be in a new situation. And the Celtics were looking to trade him just because he was going to be overpaid. The production wasn't there. The injury stuff has been a problem. And they were actively trying to trade him last year in exchange for someone like Drew Holiday. So both sides were looking at the situation and realizing that it was probably a good idea for them to go their separate ways. The problem was, as we've talked about in a couple of recent videos, just the fact that Walker is a really difficult guy to trade. He makes $36 million next season, $37 on a player option the following. And this has been a theme over the last couple of seasons where there are players that get older, get unhappy, are on huge contracts, and they are tough to move. And ultimately the trade works out the way that this one has, where you're having to give up assets. And this is the first big move of the Brad Stevens as GM era. He certainly is not wasting time. This Oklahoma City trade was always the most likely one. It's always the one that made the most sense when you just looked at the assets involved and you looked at the easiest way for Boston to dump Kemba Walker on another team and a team that would be motivated to take on his salary. Oklahoma City was always that team. So Boston gives away Kemba Walker, essentially. They give up their own first-round pick in this draft. I'm not overly worried about the second-round picks in this. And they're getting back Al Horford. They're getting back Moses Brown, who I'm sure a lot of Thunder fans will say is a bigger part of this trade than most people realize. I'm not going to have like a huge opinion about Moses Brown in this video, but some people make the case that he is an intriguing young prospect. And yeah, so they get rid of Walker, and this is really, really important for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, there have been some issues between him and the team, but financially it's a big, big deal because you go from paying Kemba 36 this year, 37 the following on a player option that he almost assuredly is going to pick up. And instead you get Al Horford, who makes less money this year and next year also makes less money than Kemba, and his contract is non-guaranteed. This saves Boston $20 million on their payroll next year, assuming that Walker would have picked up his player option because he would have, and that they're going to buy out Al Horford and not pay out the entirety of his contract, not this coming season, but the following. Saves them a ton of money just in time to potentially extend Marcus Smart if he is still on the roster at that point, or open up more cap space flexibility. They're getting out of Kemba Walker's contract essentially a year earlier, and that's the reason for giving up the value here. I think the reasoning for this trade on both sides is pretty clear. Boston wants more flexibility. They don't want Kemba Walker anymore. They want to bring in a big guy in Al Horford that'll help them in the front court. Of course, it's odd that Al Horford is returning to Boston on a contract that they didn't want to sign him to in the first place, and it's the reason why he left. I'm sure there have been conversations had back and forth with Al Horford about him being willing to actually play in Boston. Otherwise, they never would have made the trade in the first place. And I really like the trade for both sides. I do. I don't think anybody is looking at this and being really upset about it. I think if you're a Celtics fan, it's kind of annoying that you signed Kemba to the contract that you did, and now here you are 2 years later dumping him and having to get rid of a first-round pick. But the cost here really isn't that prohibitive. Like I said, it's second-round picks. Moses Brown could be something. And a first-round pick in this draft is not the end of the world if you're Boston to get that level of financial flexibility. For Oklahoma City, it's the Sam Presti special, right? If someone has a first-round pick available and a veteran they want to dump, Sam Presti will gladly raise his hand and say, hey, I will take that guy. He just continues to stockpile these picks. I believe they have 3 picks now in the first round in this draft, and they did it while giving up a guy in Al Horford that they got assets to take on last offseason. I'm going to try and do this off the top of my head, but I believe they went from Dennis Schroeder to Danny Green. They get a pick out of that to Danny Green to Al Horford, they get a pick out of that. To Al Horford to Kemba Walker, they get a pick out of that. And they're probably going to get something for Kemba down the road as well. This is something they have done continually, time after time. Think about the last 2 to 2.5 years for Oklahoma City. They bring in Chris Paul in exchange for Russell Westbrook. They get assets. They move Chris Paul. They get assets. They move Dennis Schroeder. They get assets. They move Danny Green. They get assets. They move Al Horford. They get assets. They're going to probably do the same thing with Kemba. They're going to have conversations with him and try and figure out what the long-term plan is going to be. Does Kemba want to be in Oklahoma City? Does he want to be a mentor for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Does he want to sit at home like Al Horford did for half the season and run it back and try and get healthy and really get his knee right? All those things are going to be conversations Oklahoma City is going to have with Kemba Walker, but their, motivation here was to get the first-round pick. Another asset in the treasure trove of assets that Oklahoma City continues to stockpile with this team and with this roster is a W on both sides. I mean, obviously for Boston, it's not ideal that you're giving up assets to dump a contract that you just signed 2 years ago, but ultimately, with the situation you're in currently, it's a move that I think they ended up having to do, and someone was going to have to trade for Kemba Walker, and that team always kind of looked like it was going to be Oklahoma City. Really interesting how quickly Brad Stevens worked here. He's only had the job for like a week and a half to 2 weeks, and he's already moved Kemba. This, like I said, this is the first big one. He's not wasting any time. He knows this roster better than anyone, and deciding to move on from Kemba, bringing in Al Horford is certainly a huge, huge move. And now when you're looking at the Celtics roster moving forward into next year, as of right now at least, assuming there's no other big moves, you're certainly lacking a bit of perimeter creation in the backcourt specifically. So you've got kind of like a blank spot, Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford at the 5, Robert Williams potentially there as well, Moses Brown there. They've got a better rotation at the 5 spot than they've had since Al Horford left, basically, but obviously a huge hole in the backcourt. They've got to figure out a way to address that. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a potential Marcus Smart trade in the works down the road. Clearly, Boston is looking at this roster and they're looking to make moves. They're looking to give up, in this case, picks to be able to change things up, from a roster perspective. But this is weird. I got the notification and I thought it was a fake Woj account. Because you know how Twitter would just like randomly send you notifications about accounts that like you don't even really care about. I thought it was one of those because I don't even think this trade can go through until much closer to the draft. We just had a conference semifinals game last night, and there are 2 more tonight, and a trade is going through. I did not expect to be making a trade video today. Let's just put it that way. So I would imagine, my phone's going off. I would imagine that this is not something that can officially go through until closer to the draft. But Oklahoma City is going to have 3 picks now in the first round of this draft. We don't know where the first 2 are going to be. The lottery is 5 days away. Oklahoma City could end up with the 1st, 5th, and 16th picks in this draft. And even if they don't get great lottery luck, they can use this 16th pick to move up into the top 5 if they choose to. They've got a ton of options here moving forward. Oklahoma City's in a great spot. And I'm like legitimately envious of what's happening in Oklahoma City, because it's literally just what you would do in 2K, where you just get all of the first-round picks you possibly could and then go from there. I mean, Sam Presti is doing an incredible job, and it's interesting because it's never something he's really had to do before, right? They built up the team with top picks, but they were always their own picks with Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook. Then those guys move on at various points, and then he decides to run it all back and continue to go after playoff appearances with Paul George or Russ. That doesn't go well. Then they trade those guys, and he just turns into a completely different type of general manager where he's just getting every first-round pick the league has to offer. And like I said, if you want to tell me a year from now that they're getting a first-round pick to trade Kemba Walker somewhere, I wouldn't be surprised. I think this is a W for Boston from a financial perspective. Opens up cap space for them next offseason, assuming that they don't re-sign Marcus Smart, or at least the option to re-sign Marcus Smart without going crazy into the luxury tax. Saves them a ton financially. Oklahoma City gets the first round pick, and Kemba Walker might be a huge winner here as well, because in contrast to what's happening in Boston, nobody's going to rush Kemba Walker back in Oklahoma City. They're not in a hurry to be good next year. He might not even be a relevant part of the roster. If they get Cade Cunningham and then they have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Kemba Walker is just going to kind of be there. So he has the option to rest, to get his knee right, to get healthy, to be a positive asset on what could potentially be a big expiring contract in the following season. Or if he's just that unhappy in Oklahoma City, he can just turn down the player option and go somewhere else at a huge financial hit to himself, obviously. So a crazy, crazy trade. I did not expect Kemba Walker to get moved today. I expect him to get moved at some point in the offseason, probably to Oklahoma City. We've done multiple videos on this, but today of all days, I'm shocked. Super cool. This is why we love the NBA. At any point, at any time, things can change like that, whether it's free agency, the draft, trade stuff, and this included 2 out of the 3. I've been reminded, by the way, by Twitter, we were talking about how they went from Schroeder to all these other guys. The timeline is actually Enes Kanter into Carmelo Anthony, into Dennis Schroeder, into Danny Green, into Al Horford, into Kemba Walker, and getting first-round picks all along the way. Sam Presti, hats off to you, man. It's awesome to see, and I can't wait until the day comes that Oklahoma City starts cashing in on these picks and starts trading them for other players or moving up in the draft and starts using all these assets, because they're going to have multiple first-round picks in every draft from now until the end of time, it feels like. It's going to be super cool to see what they do, and now we'll see what Boston does with this roster as well. It's craziness today. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, fellas. I didn't expect to make this one today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you have a good rest of your day. If you want to see more videos from me, boxes on screen. Like I said, anytime stuff like this goes down, if I'm around, if I'm at the house, I'm making a video about it as quickly as I can once I get my thoughts together. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing. Have a good rest of your day. Catch you next time, fellas. Peace.